Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. Take complex source material, boil it down, and give you that essential knowledge shortcut. You really shouldn't have to wade through dense texts to get the core ideas. And today, we've got a really unique situation on our hands. We've been looking at sources that honestly promised the universe. The title is The Nature of Space and Time, and it's attributed to, giants. Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose. Just seeing that title, those names, it sets you up for this incredibly deep, maybe mind-bending exploration of cosmology.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you see Hawking and Penrose on space and time, and you immediately think, okay, black hole, singularities, the Big Bang. The really fundamental heavy stuff. You expect every page to be just packed with equations, dense arguments.
Right. But here's the twist, and it's a pretty big one. The specific documents we dove into, they contain zero equations, no diagrams, no discussion of space or time or anything like that. Instead, what we found is this repeated, very explicit statement that there's just no content there. The physics we expected, completely absent. So we had to pivot. Our deep dive today isn't actually into cosmology because, well, the content just isn't in our source. It's really about the structure of information itself. Our goal for you, the learner, is to look at what is there, which is this structured, declared lack of content, and see what we can learn from silence. Okay, let's try and unpack this.
So the only real text, the only piece of information repeated throughout the body of these source documents is just 4 words. This page intentionally left blank.
Yeah, and I find that phrase so fascinating because it uses the word intentionally. It rules out, a mistake. This isn't some printing error or just an oversight. It feels very deliberate. It's a formal choice. So what does that declaration intentionally left blank tell us about the structure of a formal document like this?
Well, it immediately changes how you look at it, right? You stop looking for an error and start thinking about design. In formal publishing, especially in really rigorous fields like physics, seeing that phrase is a definite signal. It tells you that the empty space isn't just empty space, it's planned. It's a placeholder. It's serving a purpose, usually marking some kind of boundary.
Okay, but couldn't it just be, habit? Or like a technical requirement. Maybe the printer needed an even number of pages for binding, or the next chapter had to start on a right-hand page, so they just slap this phrase on the blank page. Is it possible we're reading too much into what's basically just, administrative tidying up?
That's a fair point, and it could be purely logistical in some cases. But the phrasing intentionally left blank is usually a step above just leaving a page empty. An empty page could be anything. But the declaration suggests it's part of the document's formal structure. It codifies the gap, makes it official, you might say. And historically, these pages do have important roles beyond just page count. Sometimes it was even about security, making sure extra pages couldn't be slipped in unnoticed. But more often, especially in dense academic work, they signal something important structurally, like, okay, we've just finished a major conceptual block, pause here. Or what's coming next is so different, we need a clean break. It's kind of like in music, The silence right before a huge crescendo. That silence is part of the music. It defines what came before and prepares you for what's next.
Okay, I see that. Defining boundaries, setting scope. But here's where it gets, for me, really strange and potentially more meaningful. We're not just talking about one blank page, one boundary.
Yeah.
In the source files we analyzed, this phrase, this page intentionally left blank, shows up 6 times, one after the other, consecutively.
6 times. Yeah, that repetition, that really changes the picture, doesn't it?
Yep.
1 blank page. Okay, maybe logistics. 2, maybe standard front matter, like you said, but 6. 6 consecutive declared blank pages in a work supposedly about the very fabric of reality. That starts to feel less like logistics and more like, well, like a statement in itself.
Exactly. 6. Why 6? Is there significance to that number, or is it just the repetition itself that matters? What's that telling us?
Well, the repetition definitely signals a sustained, structured kind of void. The number 6 suggests sequence. Or perhaps distinct parts. Imagine, say, an architect's plan for a huge building. If they mark 6 specific areas as Phase 2 development details, TBC, they haven't built anything there yet, but they've defined those 6 zones. They exist structurally. So applying that here for the nature of space and time, it might imply that the authors, or whoever structured this document, are setting up 6 major sequential conceptual pillars. Pillars that are fundamental to the topic, but for whatever reason, aren't filled in within the specific source material we have. The repetition turns it from just formatting into like a deliberate organizational map of missing pieces.
Right. It suggests that even the absence of knowledge or the separation between ideas is being carefully categorized and ordered. So this is where it gets really useful for you, the listener. We've sort of established that structure can be information,
Yeah.
even if the page is blank. But how do we actually use these 6 sequential breaks as a practical insight?
I think it forces us towards what you might call metacognition, thinking about linking. Or in this case, thinking about how experts like Hawking and Penrose might structure a massive argument. They don't just throw ideas down randomly, right? They build a logical framework. These 6 blanks, appearing consecutively, tell us something about the level of organization, the compartmentalization in their approach. It suggests that, at least in this presentation, the huge topic of space and time is broken down into maybe 6 major distinct stages or aspects. And these aspects are apparently significant enough that you need a complete mental stop, a formal break, before moving from one to the next.
So the repetition isn't just emphasis, it's showing us the scaffolding. Even without seeing the actual content, we learn about the underlying structure they felt was necessary. We learned that, for them, the whole concept was divisible into these 6 parts, structurally speaking.
Precisely. Think about maybe a really complex legal contract. You often find pages intentionally left blank before big appendices or schedules. Those aren't just there by accident. They ensure that Schedule A is totally separate from Schedule B. It prevents confusion, maintains clarity. In our case, these 6 blanks seem to define 6 unique conceptual containers where presumably the dense physics arguments were meant to go. That level of structural planning, that rigor, that itself is a key takeaway about the nature of this kind of high-level work.
I like that idea. We're forced to appreciate the artistry of the boundaries, as you put it earlier. But I still have that nagging question. Are we just overthinking printer instructions? Why is spending time on this structural analysis actually valuable, especially when we're aiming for knowledge shortcuts?
Because I think when we're trying to learn quickly, we tend to scan for keywords, for
Yeah.
content, right? We often ignore the formatting, the layout, the packaging. But this exercise forces us to look only at the packaging. And in really foundational, high-level work, the structure isn't just incidental. It's often deeply tied to the author's intent. Think about something like a university course syllabus. How the professor divides the semester, the order of topics, the deliberate gaps. That structure tells you a lot about their priorities. It communicates the relative importance and the flow of ideas, maybe even better than the introductory paragraph does. So here, the structure, the 6 distinct sequential gaps, tells us these areas of knowledge are seen as separate, needing to be tackled in order. It hints at the hierarchy of the arguments. One block builds on the previous one, perhaps. That gives you insight into the method, the thinking process, which can be incredibly valuable.
Okay, that clicks. The structural insight is the shortcut here. We didn't get the physics, but we got a glimpse into how the architects of those physics arguments might have organized their thoughts. We learned something about their process. So, let's recap. We started with a huge topic, the nature of space and time. And by focusing only on these explicit statements of absence, we managed to pull out some real knowledge purely from the structure, the boundaries defined in the source material. Boundaries declared meticulously 6 times in a row.
Exactly. And we concluded that this 6-fold repetition likely isn't just filler. It signals a sequence of significant conceptual breaks, presumably needed to logically structure the complex ideas of Hawking and Penrose. We learned about the architecture of the argument, the intentionality behind how it might be presented. It shows that rigorous organization is fundamental even before you get to the content itself.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah.
How can you apply this when you're dealing with complex information in your own work or study, whether that's, business reports, scientific papers, historical accounts?
Well, it suggests you should start paying attention to the negative space. Look for the intentional gaps, the structured silences in the material you encounter. Think about those 6-fold repetitions in your own field. If you're looking at a project plan, what phases are glossed over, where are the boundaries between stages explicitly marked, maybe even with placeholder text. That silence, that gap, often tells you something important about what's being assumed, what's considered complete, or what's deliberately being deferred. Or consider a presentation. If a whole section on, say, potential risks is marked to be added or just skipped entirely, that's a structural choice. It communicates something, maybe confidence, maybe avoidance, but it's communicating information through its absence. The structure, the sequence, the omissions, they often hold keys to deeper understanding.
That's a really useful way to think about it. Instead of just feeling overwhelmed by data, look for the intentional voids that shape the narrative.
Exactly. Which brings us to our final thought for you to mull over. If a topic as fundamental as the nature of space and time apparently required, in this representation at least, 6 intentional structural breaks to organize its core components, what foundational knowledge in your field might be defined by similar structural gaps? What are the implied, maybe unstated prerequisites, the things that have to be conceptually walled off before you can proceed? Where are those 6 or however many non-negotiable boundaries that define the very structure of what you know, and what critical insights are hiding in that structured absence? Start looking for the shape of the silence. You might find the knowledge you didn't even know was missing.